Good afternoon. Welcome everyone back to another installment of our Advanced Insight webinar series. Today, we'll be reviewing NFPA 72 as it relates to emergency communication systems and how our VM3000 series relates to these standards. To give a quick understanding of this, NFPA, or the National Fire Protection Association, is an international nonprofit organization devoted to eliminating death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire, electrical, or related hazards. So throughout this webinar, we're going to discuss the importance of NFPA and then review the product functionality, features, benefits, and applications of our VM3000 series. So my name is Shauna Gordon. I am marketing manager here at TOA Electronics. And then we also have Dan Shore. He's our engineering and product manager. You can go ahead and say hello from space. And we also have Jim McGinnis, who's our systems design specialist, also from TOA. So then to continue, we are going to just go through a little more detail on what it is that we're going to be covering. And just so you're aware, we'll be focusing specifically on Chapter 24 of the NFPA 72. And that actually just lays out the standards for fire alarm and M&S one-way communication systems. We'll then go ahead and cover the VM3000 and then how that fits into both fire alarm and M&S categories. We'll look at communication between the FACP and the VM3000. And then lastly, we'll review the features and benefits of our VM3000 series, along with some typical project designs. We do want everyone here to leave with a better understanding of emergency communication systems and where to get answers to questions on the code. So if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to submit them through the chat box, the Q&A, and we'll definitely respond to those by the end of this webinar. And if some of you are familiar with NFPA, that's great, but you might not also be familiar with everything that it entails. And just so you were, NFPA in general, it does entail quite a number of guidelines and regulations. But as I mentioned, we'll be focusing specifically on NFPA 72 and review some of those high-level topics. So Dan, would you mind giving a further explanation of how the NFPA relates to mass notification?
Sure. NFPA provides the code that the authorities having jurisdiction, the AHJs, refer to when they're looking at building plans or looking at an existing building to see if it meets that code. As you mentioned, NFPA covers a huge variety of topics. For example, NFPA 30 is the National Electrical Code. They have code for nuclear power plants and airports, but for our purposes today, NFPA 72, communications for emergency systems, we're going to be dealing with Chapter 24. Mass notification systems resulted directly from the military's response to 9/11. The first time mass notification entered the actual NFPA 72 code was in the 10th edition in 2010. Previous mentions of mass notification were only in annex materials or were consolidated from other chapters into Chapter 24. So in addition, a lot of elements from the Department of Defense went in there. For those of you who do military jobs, that's the United Facilities Criteria 4-021-01, which is whole building design guide for mass notification systems. So NFPA is an all-volunteer organization made up of fire and emergency professionals, academics, and stakeholders. The systems we're looking at today have been categorized into 4 basic layers. Oops, pardon me. I'm actually in a car in a remote site, so bear with me as I put my thumb in front of the camera or other such foolishness. So layer 1 relates to means of notification, and I'm going to read these directly from the code so that there's no misunderstanding here. Layer 1 relates to means of notification of occupants by systems or equipment installed inside a building and controlled only by authorized users. And that's an in-building emergency communication system. Layer 2 relates to a means of notification of occupants on the exterior of a building and controlled again by authorized users. Layer 3 relates to a means of notification of personnel through individual measures. That's distributed recipient MNS. And layer 4 relates to means of notification by personnel by public measures. That's broadcast radio, television, satellite, and so forth. The layers can be used in combination. In all cases, the system design needs to follow a risk analysis, which is an extremely important part of the design process. And that will give you the guidelines to follow to be integrated into the emergency response plan. We'll be dealing with layer 1 and 2 primarily. There you go.
All right, thank you, Dan. I did go ahead and put that link into the chat box. So if anyone would like to take a review, feel free to look and link as we go through the webinar. So again, definitely thank you for that basis. And I will pass this over on to Jim. And if Jim, you're able to share how the VM 3000 fits into NFPA regulations and guidelines, that would be great.
All right, let's see what I have here. There is, bear with me. We do have a link. I can find what I'm looking for. This was one of the, whoops, not there, here. This was the mass notification system guideline, I think, Dan, that you were referring to. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so you can take a look at this URL. They have all kinds of downloads available for the specification and guides. It gets very intense and very in-depth depending on what you're doing. For us, we're normally doing mass notification of inside or outside of buildings. So we get into what is existing, what we're going to need to change, what we're going to need to install, and we have to follow the rules and regulations if this is going to be truly a certified system. And there are various pieces to that, and a number of them are that a lot of the equipment needs, or really the core of the equipment needs to be in the same rack, and then distribution accordingly throughout the building. So, if you need to have an absolutely certified system, you got to follow some very specific guidelines. If there's a variation to that, where certain units can be elsewhere, and technically it's outside of the certification processes in some cases, but it doesn't stop the operation. It's just a question of how specific do we need to be. So, if we take a look at some of these units that we have, so we look at the main unit here. From the front panel, we give you a microphone, a walkie-talkie, style microphone for doing alerts, etc. We have built-in messages. There are messages that you can also load into the box. There's some default, but of course they can be customized. And the main unit comes up as 6 zones across the bottom here. So you can have 6 zones immediately with one main unit. It depends on the amount of power that's required for any one particular zone. This is a 240-watt unit. If you're going to do high power, we correlate that to outputs 1 and 2. And then the box would be, we'll call it at limit as far as its power. But then what we do is we have extension amplifiers, such as this one, which we will then add to the main one up to 9, so that we can have a total of 10 boxes, six zones per, so 60 zones is the max. But of course, if you have one area that's 2 high power zones, all right, well, now you're going to be four zones less on that particular system if you were going to max it out. We don't see too many cases where we're going to max out our system, but this gives you an idea of the scalability up to 60 zones. So we have input adjustments on the front, outputs, and then depending on what you want to do with paging to a particular zone, these machines are set up for specific reasons regarding access. You have to allow access. You physically need to be with the box if you're doing certain adjustments to the machine, because you don't want a machine to accidentally get into a mode that it won't work. So based on the guidelines that we have to follow through the documents that we've been talking about, you need to be at the box and to do certain things. You can allow remote access, but of course, if you're going to set this up and once it's settled, the box will be set as is, and that's by design so that nothing can go wrong. From the back panels for connections, etc., you can see a lot of what we're doing. We do battery backup as well, or I shouldn't say battery backup, but it's alternate power in case there's a power fail. So depending on what you're doing, we have a unit called a VX2000DS that we connect there, and or with batteries depending on what you're doing. So it depends on a lot of different applications. So you can see dip switch settings here will allow you to do certain things, sort of configuration or firmware or whatever. But again, they have to be set. You can't just jump into the box and do it remotely. And that's by design, so nothing can go wrong. We have speaker outputs on the left here, zones 1 through 6, and emergency amp input in case there's a failover. You have your attenuation control lines down at the bottom. And then over here, you have control in and output controls. And there's also emergency controls through these RJ45 connectors. These here are not Ethernet. These are specific connectors to make it easier so that you don't have so many different plug-in devices on the back. It's kind of a convenience thing. You do have one LAN connection here on the right, and that's for the access. And then we have our links for the system down here on the lower right as well. So that's the extension amplifier, but let me just go back to the main unit. Kind of looks fairly similar, but here's where you would enter in your audio inputs, etc., your background music, if applicable. But you'll see a lot of similarities between the boxes, and it's just a matter of expanding those out. We do have a brochure up on our website, gives you some of ideas regarding our concept and design for the VM3000. Different levels. You could have different types of speakers at different levels, different zones. They can be combined or separated depending on what you want to do. This goes into other product as well, but you can see here, if I expand this up a little bit, you have different amplifiers, different pieces, things that can be connected, et cetera, and so forth. And so here's, kind of a combination picture for the 3000. And then we also have our intercom system that we do, which is a different animal, kind of related, but kind of different. So with that, that's basically what I have on this piece of it.
Okay, Jim, thank you for sharing that as well. Dan, question for you. Would you be able to share how communications between the FACP and the VM3000 work?
Sure. Let's go back a little bit. So the NFPA states that while a fire alarm control unit may broadcast both mass notification and fire alarm, it can only do so if it's listed to both UL 864 and UL 2572, because the functions that are required for each system is different. All right, so as far as combining, I'm going to read directly from the NFPA code book, which relates directly to the VM3000. Quote, combining or integrating in-building fire EVACS systems with other communication systems such as mass notification, PA, and paging systems is permitted. The fire alarm and priority mass notification messages, as determined by the risk analysis, must take precedence over any other announcements such as paging from a telephone system or other PA system. In addition to paging functions, it provides an end-to-end test of the audible notification components and circuits. Occupants familiar with the use of the system for normal paging are also more likely to be comfortable and proficient in the use of the system during an emergency. That leads us directly to the TOA VM3000 system, because it does all of those functions in one. That is the intent of the VM3000. So the way that the VM3000 works in these systems is it is designated as an autonomous control unit, an ACU, under both 864 and 2572. So it can handle both fire and MNS. Its function is to take the notification appliances, those inputs from the fire alarm panel, for example, smoke alarms, pull stations, those kinds of things, and take that notification output from the fire alarm control panel to trigger a pre-recorded message and allow a microphone override of that message. We do that through contact closure outputs, relay outputs from the fire alarm control panel, control inputs to the fire alarm control panel, and the same thing on the VM3000 side. This is all control contact closure. On the back of the unit, there are two sets of these. The ones that we're concerned with are the ones in the RJ45 connectors. And those are able to be monitored at all times if necessary. Speakers have to be listed to the application to which mass notification only systems, where if there's a requirement for a particular space, they're called acoustically defined spaces. That is tough acoustically, and there's not a listed speaker that can take care of it, then you can use a speaker that is appropriate for the job. The idea is that they have to provide the correct intelligibility, which is an important consideration for these systems. So the other thing that we have to take into account with these systems is pathway survivability. If the system is performing a fire alarm, is performing as a fire alarm EVACS, then the pathway survivability is going to be determined by the AHJ and the stakeholders. For example, level 0 means no survivability. Levels 2 and 3 will require 2-hour burn rating on whatever communication cabling you have in there. And that's going to depend a lot on the design of the building. So you're going to want to be in touch with the stakeholders and the AHJ on that. That wiring holds true until, for example, speaker wire is in that category until it gets to the zone that it's covering. And then it doesn't have to have that fire rating, according to NFPA 72. Obviously, in these systems, there's a secondary battery power supply, as Jim mentioned. And because we have the ability to do both fire and MNS, we have the ability to do 4 messages on this system. So 1 alert, 1 evac for fire, 1 alert, 1 evac for mass notification. And when you put the system in, you are going to have to choose which one of those is priority. That would be determined by, excuse me, by the facility. For example, military facilities will want to warn of an attack by outside forces, and that has priority over fire. Same thing if you're in a school situation and you judge that it's more important for the students to have an override of a fire alarm to instruct them where to go and where not to go. That would be a decision where you would do MNS priority. Most others will be fire alarm priority. So again, the connection is prescribed. It has to be monitored if you're in a remote location, as Jim was mentioning. If you're in the same room within 20 feet in conduit, no monitoring is required. If you move the VM3000 away from the fire alarm control panel into, say, another room, another floor, then you have to have an auxiliary screen from the fire alarm control panel located next to the unit. The idea is that the first responder, when they come in to the ACU, which whether it's the fire alarm panel or the fire alarm panel and the VM3000, they want to be able to see everything in one shot. So if you're moving it away, you can certainly move it to a different room, but you will require a second local fire alarm display.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. That was definitely a thorough explanation. Definitely gave a review of our VM3000 series as well. And it did seem like you guys hit on quite a few different features and benefits. If there's anything else that you think should be highlighted, Jim, you can go ahead and review those. Otherwise, if you want to maybe give some additional typical project designs, I know Dan mentioned a few with, government and school. If there are any other, just sort of typical designs that you might be able to describe, that'd be great, just so people can kind of get like a well-rounded review of how the system works and what it can be used in.
Well, one of the things I wanted to bring up, which Dan mentioned, is the UL certified speakers that we work with typically. So on our website, you have a number of speakers you can choose from depending on the application. So here are pendants, and these are all rated, and these are all guy wire supported. So no swinging from the speaker wire, so to speak. But we have a number of the different models here. And then we get into our paging horns. The SC630TU is rated, and that's a 30-watt horn, so you can get quite a bit of power out of there. And then we get into our ceiling speakers. These are F-series ceiling speakers. We have several different models here. This one offers a dispersion cone for better sound, dispersion throughout the space. Let me see, that was the 120 CU. So this is the 22 CU2, the dual package model. Then we get into the 2322. This is a similar model, only without the dispersion cone, again, depending on your application. And then we get into the bigger one.
Right, Jim. Sorry to interrupt. The only so you're describing UL 1480 UUMW
Right.
speakers. The 2322 is not rated for that. It's just the F122.
Oh, the F122 is it? Okay, my apologies.
That's correct.
So that is here. So here's a little bit about what it looks like, a little better picture. Well, that picture's too small. Again, so Dan corrected me on that, thank you. Some of the speakers, you have to read the detail even more. Thought I remembered that one, I apologize, I did not. It's very important if you're gonna follow these guidelines to make sure that you remember every detail. It gets pretty specific, and Dan is our resident expert on the mass notification stuff. So kudos to him.
I'll take your kudos and I'll double it.
Okay.
Let me make a note on. So remember, these are one-way paging applications, and they can be used in any situation, from an educational standpoint to a warehouse to a commercial building. There are limitations to the VM3000 as far as applications. It is when a pre-recorded announcement is played, it's played to all areas. So it's not suitable for high rises. It also has a limitation of 2,000 watts and 60 zones. So if you have a 2 million square foot facility, we're going to need to come up with a different solution for you. The other thing that you should be aware of is if you are using the VM3000 in a capacity where it's a fire alarm and MNS system, and you want it to meet the specifications, you're going to have at least one VM3240 VA and one VM3240E. And that's only because of the number of outputs, status outputs, that each unit has. So we will require 3 outputs minimum to the fire alarm control panel to be able to operate it according to code on that. If you're doing one or the other, you can build a system from one 3240 VA all the way up to 9 extension amplifiers on a VA. Something to keep in mind if you're planning on doing a fire alarm and mass notification.
All right, gentlemen, again, thank you for sharing your insight to everything on the topic for NFPA 72 specifically, and then our VM3000. And I do want to just recap the different points that we touched on again. So, this was specific to chapter 24, and definitely that is only a drop in the bucket on what NFPA regulates. We also went ahead and reviewed our VM3000 and how that fit into both the fire alarm and M&S categories. We did figure out how the communications between FACP and the VM3000 operate. And then we did have a review of some of the highlighted features and benefits of that series, along with some, typical project designs. So just to also go through, we'd like to go to our Q&A, not P&A. And I do see two questions. So the first one, Dan, I know you're versed on the VX3000 series. Just this question is basically looking to see what the difference between VM3000 versus the VX3000 series is. Okay, I think we might have lost Dan. May pop back on or not. Okay, so maybe why don't we swing back around to that? Jim, there is another question, and it is that there is a mention about a backup battery. Is there a reference on how long that backup battery would last in the case of an emergency of a blackout?
Well, as in any battery situation, you have to look at how many pieces you're going to back up, right? So it's the amount of power that's stored in the battery versus, power draw over a length of time. So it really depends on the particular system that is being put together. And so if we need that, then we'll figure out, okay, we have this amount of power draw for, X number of units, VM 3240 VA plus, one extension amplifier or 3 extension amplifiers, that type of thing, which will also determine the number of VX2000 units that you'll need, because it's not unlimited number of units per VX. So sometimes you need more of those. So it depends on what the situation is. So we have to actually figure it out per system specification that we put together. But again, it's 24 volts, so you're typically looking at 2 batteries in series, and then depending on their current and how much power that you're drawing will determine length of time. So we calculate that out for you based on your requirements.
Okay, definitely a thorough answer. I don't see that Jim was able to join back onto the webinar. Do you have insight on some of the differences of the VX3000 versus the VM3000?
Actually, I don't. The VX is a different product group that I have not worked with here in the United States, and we're looking at that particular product for future. But the VM VX are they're similar, but they're different. We'll call it that way, just as a very coarse answer. But that detailed part, no, I'm sorry, I don't have that.
And not a problem. And then for our attendees, I did send a video link, just a quick VM3000 series review. You'll be able to go ahead and link to that and check it out. Just to kind of get a quick synopsis or share it if you need to, just to kind of quickly explain what the system is about and what it entails. But with that, we definitely have come to the close of our webinar. So thank you everyone for joining. We will see you next time. And as an FYI, we will be taking a summer break. So we will be back in October, and that will go into the more of the security application for our IPA1 series. So if you joined us last month, we were able to go ahead and review the expansion of that line. We have a few products that are now expanding into the IPA1, IP world. And as an FYI, we do also offer a VM3000 certification course. So if this is something that you deal with for any applications, installations, definitely check that out. We do have that on our website. And, again, we are definitely very accommodating. So if it is something that you find, you know, a scheduled course does not work for you, we're able to go ahead and, you know, schedule something out for you. But again, thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye.